PEP8 is the style guide for Python, and it says the guidelines improve the readability of code. It prevents many coffee machine discussions between developers, but it has one questionable guide. Because when it comes to readability, is enforcing the max length of a line the right way to go? Or is it harmful? Well, it might be, and in this video you see why. PEP8 says, limit all lines to a maximum of 79 characters. But the funny thing is that the article continues by saying that some teams prefer longer line lengths. So what is the maximum allowed length? Well, we got a whopping extra 20 characters. How generous. So I thought, what is this? Some kind of a negotiation? I can tell you from experience that such fuzzy rules lead to very strange team conventions. What is stopping team lead Bert to say lines should have a maximum of 87 characters? You might think this is a joke, but in my career I have seen all sorts of strange team conventions, and if you're watching this video, I bet you have too. So I want to know, where does the line length limitation come from anyway? I started programming in 1984 on this computer. It is a Philips P2000 and the standard edition could show 40 characters per line. Type a line like this and you already exceeded 40 characters and the text would wrap up like this. Now, because of line numbers, this would still work. The basic interpreter understands that a new line number marks a new line. My first PC had a Hercules graphics card that displayed 80 characters per line. Around 1990 I started programming in Turbo Pascal and used my first IDE. Now the cool thing of the IDE was this, a scroll bar. For the first time the line length did not matter anymore because you could scroll horizontally. But the line length limitation was still enforced by matrix printers that often printed 80 characters per line. When I was in school, it was not unusual to print the code of an assignment and hand it over to the teacher. Some languages even enforced a maximum of 80 characters per line. So I understand where the limitation of 80 characters comes from. But we don't live in 1990 anymore, and although there are probably some devices and languages around that have an 80 character limitation, most of them do not. That brings me back to my original question. Why the limitation of 79 characters in Python? Let's see what PEP8 has to say about that. PEP8 says limiting the line length is good to have several code files open side by side. And indeed, when I put two files next to each other, I see that a line length limitation might have helped me here. But it would only delay the problem. Put a third code file next to it and a max length of 97 characters would not have helped. The code would still not fit. Of course, two code files next to each other is great for code comparison. So if comparing code is a big part of your work, I can understand the desire to keep the lines short. Another argument is that, just like text in a book, code is more readable when lines are short. Typography has clear rules for line heights, character widths and the maximum words per line. But this assumes that lines can be broken at arbitrary positions. By the way, if you are interested in that topic, I recommend reading this book, where you learn to improve communicating with text. But we are not writing text, we are writing code. We cannot break lines arbitrarily. We must tell Python how to do that. And that comes with a price. First of all, there are many more than one line-breaking rules. Here are some examples. Here is a list with names on a single line. I'll put a vertical line around the 80 character mark on the screen. I insert an arbitrary line break and everything keeps working. The indentation was not even important here. I can also decide to put a few names per line. Breaking up lists to multiple lines is not a problem. Unfortunately, not all Python code is so line break friendly. How do I split the string, but when I print it, everything should be on a single line? For this, I have to make two strings like this. Okay, that worked. Even if the string was closed on the first line, apparently the backslash tells Python that the string continues on the next line. Another example. The calculation of total needs to be distributed over multiple lines. Now, there are actually multiple ways to do this. Here is method 1. And that works. Some prefer to put the operator on the new line, which is also allowed. If you do not like the backslash, you can pack everything in parentheses. And that works too. Now, I am not here to tell you what is better, but I find code like this very confusing, and I would even argue that compared to the one-liner, it does not improve readability at all. And why is that? Because it requires me to think. As developers, our number one rule should be to write code as readable as possible. So you and your team need to decide what is readable code. But since not all situations are the same, how about compromising? What if a line has exactly 80 characters? Are you allowed to make an exception for this line? I'd like to remind you that the Python interpreter has no problem with long lines of code. The maximum length rule is only enforced by linters like PEP8 and PEP8. Some IDEs already show warnings while writing code. So how can you suppress this message in a linter like PEP8? Well, you start by adding an exception to the rule for this line. This will satisfy the linter and suppress the PEP8 warning in the IDE. But your team might ask you to explain why you did it. So you add more comments, but your code is still not accepted. So you do the only thing that makes sense in this situation. Do you think I'm exaggerating? I have seen style guides that tear teams apart. How can you keep everyone happy? Shall we increase the max length to 99 characters? Well, then prepare for the next discussion when the line has 100 characters. As you see, style guidelines are useful, but can also be harmful when they are too rigid. And for this particular problem, I propose the following solution. I am a big fan of short, readable code in small code files, but there are exceptions to the rule. Sometimes you need long lines or a big code file, and you should be able to do it and check in your code. Any discussion at this point kills creativity and productivity. If there is one rule that I would enforce, it is this: code first and refactor later. And when code is written just to satisfy style checkers, we have forgotten why we write code in the first place. So, what do you think? Is the max length rule helpful or harmful? Share your experiences with style guides and the discussions you had in your team in the comments. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.